He'd been using a lot of drugs. He'd been running the streets. He'd been up all night. He had the kind of like a lab rat. I was sitting across from him at lunch. I was watching him, and I watched this snake, this sort of dark mist-like snake, move from his belly and then like up in and out of his neck and then up into his head. And without even thinking, I just was like, well, what was that? And I pointed to the spot where I'd seen it go in and out of his neck. And he looked at me and he was like, you can see that? And I was like, yeah, I can see that.
Oh my God.
He looked away for a second, then he's looked back at me and he was like, he wants to talk to you.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Spiritually Challenged. I'm Jay Sherrick. I'm here with my writing partner of many years,
David Ron.
And this is actually a big day.
Because David brought a guest.
Yes, David has actually contributed
I'm doing something
to the show. And not just a guest,
yeah,
a spectacular guest, someone I'm really excited about meeting. So do you want to introduce our guest?
Well, okay. Our guest is my friend Chris Henrikson, who started an incredible organization called Street Poets LA, or just Street Poets?
Street Poets.
But it's in LA.
It is in LA.
So maybe it should be Street Poets LA.
No, stop rebranding my organization.
Right, Street Poets Peoria.
It's Street Poets Incorporated.
You could let him, but he started this incredible organization, and he's also
very spiritual, incredible
person.
Yes.
Like I've listened to some of the recordings you've done on other platforms, and
I just read his book last night.
A book of poetry,
book of incredible poetry.
Thank you, first of all, so much for being here. I really am truly excited to meet you after listening to your whole vibe and what you're about. I was so impressive. Start by telling us a little bit about, tell us a little bit about your life, your journey. Like, what got you to start this incredible organization called Street Poets?
All right. Well, my roots professionally are not that different from yours, actually. Yeah. And I started volunteering through the Writers Guild up in one of the county juvenile detention camps this is 1995.
Wait, but back up for a second. Yeah, where are you from?
I'm from Boston originally.
Wow, you're really going back.
Yeah. We could get ancestral.
You're from Boston. Yeah. And what got you to LA?
It's film school. I went to AFI.
Okay.
Yep.
And with the intention of being a director, a writer?
A writer. I went into the screenwriting program at AFI. I was a playwright all through high school and college, and I had this relationship with the writing process that I'm sure you guys can relate to, which is that it was the place, it was my sanctuary, it was my safe space.
I can't relate to that at all. I would say that's the exact opposite. It's more personal hell. Yes.
All right. That was the thread or channel I was following when I came to Los Angeles eventually.
You were going to be a writer.
Yeah, and I had been working as an arts journalist in New York City. I worked at the Village Voice briefly, and then worked at Entertainment Weekly magazine when it first started.
Nicely done.
And that kind of demystified LA for me, and so eventually I took the plunge and moved to Los Angeles.
And you came here with the intention of being a writer, and then you were saying something about going to the Writers Guild.
Well, so the script that I wrote my first year in film school happened to address some of the issues that were raised during the 1992 unrest in Los Angeles.
During the riots, is sort of that?
Correct. Yes. I finished it 2 weeks before that happened, actually.
Oh, wow.
And so
did you cause the riots? No, that was.
It might have been your script.
I think there were forces at play beyond me.
Right.
But in any case, I had written the script, and because of what transpired in the immediate wake of my finishing it, actually, a lot of people were interested in reading it, and it just kind of kicked open a door to Hollywood. That I just kind of stepped through and got on a ride.
Wow. And
it turned into a little bit of a stereotypical development hell experience where, the same reasons that it got a lot of people's attention initially also made it a very difficult project to actually get to the big screen.
Yeah.
And the fact that I was white was challenging. So
you are white, is that what we're
I am white.
Okay.
I am white.
So we've got that covered.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so somewhere in this trying to find your way through writing Hollywood, you came to what?
Yeah, so I basically sold my soul to the Hollywood studio system in those first 2 years and in desperation answered an ad in the Writers Guild Journal looking for writers to work with at-risk youth. There was like some part of me that when I saw that ad, I was like, I got to get out of my own head. I've completely betrayed myself and this sort of sacred relationship with my writing process. And I just said yes to that. Something in me was like, go.
Yeah.
So I started going up once a week for 2 hours every Wednesday night to teach a poetry writing workshop.
What was that like? Like, I mean,
Going up where?
going up to a juvenile detention facility,
it was a LA County run boys probation camp. So it was 14 to 18-year-old boys. At that time in the 90s, there were a lot of gang involved youth in that place. And it was kind of run like a military boot camp, light, you know. There was a lot of discipline. And I got to go up and commandeer the staff lounge and bring in, 8 to 10 guys at a time to sit in a circle and write poetry and listen to poetry.
Was it your idea to make it about poetry, or was that left up to you?
It was. And that is that the instinct to make it about poetry really traces back to an experience I had in college, that reading Walt Whitman, actually, Leaves of Grass, that it was probably the most potent spiritual experience of my life.
I was going to say that wasn't just reading Walt Whitman.
Yeah,
I've heard parts of this story.
Yeah.
So share that with us if you don't mind.
It was just a sort of normal Thursday night in my fraternity house. And
what college
this is at Duke University.
Duke University.
And I
you're gonna love this.
I had gone out to a party, and then something I went to the party, and then there was like a voice in my head that said, go back to your, I've been trying to read Whitman all day. Couldn't make sense. I had a pen out. I was carving up his writing and trying to figure out like what
rewriting Walt Whitman. I think
exactly
that's what you do at Duke University.
You were pushing up Whitman.
I was doing a close reading of Walt Whitman, which is not how you should read Whitman. And I was at this party, and this strong voice just said, go back to your room and get back to that book. And so I went up to the third floor of my fraternity section at Duke, and there was a party going on downstairs, and I just started reading Whitman. And I had this, I guess you would call it a transcendent experience, where suddenly it felt like Walt Whitman was sitting next to me on my bed, reading the book with me out loud. Like we read it together. And, I came out of this 3-hour really ecstatic experience, tears streaming down my face, and with this incredible sense that there's life after death. A lot of the sort of the fear of death.
Right. I love how he went right to me on that one. That's your territory. That is my territory.
It was a really strong physical experience, sensation of like, okay, you don't need to be afraid of death, and there is life after death, and you just encountered the spirit of the person who wrote this poetry.
So you literally felt like Walt Whitman's spirit was sitting next to you, kind of like tutoring you in his work.
That's exactly what it felt like. It's exactly what it felt like.
And prior to that, had you had spiritual inclinations, or
little moments in childhood,
Perfect.
lying on the grass, little feelings of like connection to.
Yeah, but here, this is this huge awakening.
This was the most
experience.
palpable kind of, whoa, there's more to this world and universe than
what happened to you as a result of that?
In the moment, I just staggered downstairs and was trying to engage some of my fraternity brothers, all of whom thought I was tripping on shrooms or ecstasy or something. Yeah. And I realized in the moment that like I want to hold on to this ecstatic feeling, but my life is not built to do this, and certainly an academic university environment is not the place to
fraternity.
Fraternity, no less. Yes, exactly. So I kind of pocketed the experience, and it really wasn't until I hit that crisis point back in Los Angeles that I guess I was 27 at that time. So about 5-6 years later, that I realized like there was magic in poetry that I felt like that's what I need to bring to the probation camp, not a screenwriting class.
I'm so curious about like that first moment in the room when 8 gang members come up and you're like, so we're here to talk about poetry. Like, how is that received?
Right. So my very first class, the director of the camp, he knew I was coming, and they basically asked for volunteers. Right. So my initial group were actually young people in the facility that had, for whatever reason,
signed up
probably
for it.
mostly boredom,
Yeah.
decided that they wanted to show up and sign up for it.
So they were willing participants, more or
They were
less.
willing participants, and especially the probation camps at that time, there was no programming. I mean, there was not. It was like this military boot camp. They were bored out of their minds.
So it was poetry or nothing, basically.
They were like, "There's a dude coming to teach poetry. Yeah, I'll do that. Like, I get anything to get me off my bunk and out of this hellhole where I'm being yelled at all the time." And so they were more amenable than I had anticipated.
Right.
I went up with a sales pitch about how poetry can transform your life and writing and finding your voice.
Yeah.
And I gave that pitch, but they were kind of like,
Let's get to it.
Write. And a couple of them actually brought things that they had written already. Yeah. A lot of them were aspiring hip hop artists. It wasn't like it was the written
that
word
foreign
was
to them.
completely out of the blue. But actually, right after that first class, as we were leaving, and I was like, I couldn't believe how well it had gone and how receptive they had been. One of the guys turned to me and said, "Hey, where the hell you been, man?"
Oh,
and
that's incredible.
He's like,
man.
I said, I get released in 3 weeks. I've been here for 6 months, and like, why are we getting this now?
We needed this.
Yes,
we needed.
But
this.
I heard it, and it was weird. In the moment, I heard it like the universe was asking me that question. Like, where the hell you been? You know, I heard it. The deeper level of it.
Wow.
Because it was a weird thing for him to say to me. In the
And
moment,
did you
too.
ever connect with him further?
Yeah. We've yes.
Okay.
He's one of the guys that stayed connected to us over the years.
Okay. So you then, out of this experience, obviously over time, you created this organization called Street Poets. Tell us what the organization is and what they do.
Yeah, so it's a nonprofit organization that harnesses the healing power of poetry and now music to help empower young people to transform their own lives and the world around them. We like to say to dream a new world into being, both for themselves and for others. And so the seed of it was born in a juvenile detention camp, but now the organization has grown to work more. It works a lot in schools, and we still do work with incarcerated youth, but the organization has grown beyond the
Are you still affiliated with the organization?
I am. I'm like I think they call me, I'm a founder firekeeper. So I kind of pop in every once in a while. And I'm also helping. We're building a community center in South LA right now.
Oh, amazing.
So I help them with their fundraising stuff. And
how old is the organization?
About 28 years old.
Yeah. I've heard some stories, and the stories are just so powerful about how this program has changed lives and just opened people up. It's so moving and so it's incredible.
I look at it now, and what I've gotten from the experience and how it has transformed my life is so radical. It's hard for me to even, I appreciate what you're saying, and I can't imagine my life without it. It forced me in some ways through some doorways and thresholds that I never would have found had I not been in relationship with these amazing young people that I encountered there.
Is there one example, just sort of a prototypical example? I know there's thousands because I've heard some of them, but if you were to talk about how that program, Street Poets, touched people's lives, is there one example that comes to mind that you think in some way at least gives a window into how powerful it can be in people's lives?
It's really difficult to isolate one. I would say the person and the relationship that comes to mind most directly for me right now is one that's it's a mentee of mine that I've known for 20 years. And part of why I would pick him is because he's doing some mentoring of me in some ways now too. Like the roles have kind of reversed.
the student has become the teacher.
Yeah, I mean, and that's true to some extent all the way along.
Yeah.
You're always learning from the people that you're working with, but he's really evolved, and he's someone who was as heavily into the gang thing as anyone I worked with.
Well, tell us his story a little bit. I mean,
his name's Jason.
Jason.
When I met him, he was kind of a knucklehead in the camp. He was the youngest kid in the camp at the time, or the second to youngest. He was surrounded by a lot of tougher kids. And it was kind of like one of those situations that you hear about when you incarcerate a young person, where the experience of being incarcerated actually has the opposite effect that you hope it would.
Of course, yeah.
And the kid, he got really sucked into that life, and it sent him down a really deep hole. So when I met him, I wish I could say that his life turned around and
Right.
everything went. He actually went
Deeper.
like off. He went off
Yeah.
the deep end, and but I was in a relationship with him, watching that happen.
That was happening within the context of the facility, or when he got out?
When he got out. So it started to happen in the facility,
Yeah.
and then when he got released.
So he just went deeper and deeper into the
So
gang.
did he end
Yeah.
up like in a gang, basically
Yes.
inside, and then
He was sort of ended up claiming that gang inside
Right.
because it was for
Protection,
his own protection. But he actually ended up in the gang later.
Tell us a little bit about his life. I want to hear
Yeah.
his arc
Yeah.
and his trajectory, if you don't mind.
So we created this space that was on a rooftop. It happened to be just coincidentally in Los Angeles, about 3 blocks from his house and from the neighborhood that he grew up in.
This was like the
This
headquarters
was our headquarters
for
that we
Street Poets.
established. Yeah, and it was where it was our first home. It's like a bunker on a rooftop in an industrial office building between SC and the Staples Center on Figueroa Street.
Yeah.
We would never be able to afford to be there
No,
now.
not now.
But then
At that time.
they were happy to have us there.
How did Jason's life evolve?
So Jason, when we first started working together, when he got out, I thought, okay, this is going to be the easiest kid to work with in the world because he's not in a gang yet. He lives right around the corner. I'm going to be on him all the time. And he's smart and probably will go to college quickly. And he'll be one of our quote unquote success stories. Cut to, he's struggled with addiction. Let me just say, by the way, that Jason would be comfortable with me sharing this.
You can check it with him before, and then
we're writing a sort of book together right now about our relationship. So
fantastic!
This is
That's awesome.
It's cool.
Yeah. But when Jason got out, he started coming around, hanging around with us, and also started struggling with his addictions, and sort of ended up really barely graduating from high school. And we did a lot of work to help him get through.
Right.
But it was something we celebrated like a kind of miracle when he graduated. And I figured he'd be moving straight on to college, and instead he got jumped into his gang. He was 18 years old at that point. Generally, young people join a gang at 12, 13, 14, like middle school age, when they're easily manipulable. And so very few people join later in life. And so I actually thought he was joking at first when he told me.
Jumped into his gang. What does that mean?
It means initiated. There were older members of his neighborhood that took him under their wing and brought him in. And when they say jumped in, it's because they part that initiation process, you get beat up. So it's all the homies jump on you, and just that's part of the
Welcome
process.
to the gang.
Welcome to the gang. Exactly.
All right. So he's been jumped into
like
the
your
gang.
fraternity? Do they do the same thing to
That's
you?
a whole nother podcast.
So he got jumped into this gang.
Yes. And he came to tell me basically it was like a week after one of my other mentees had been shot and killed and buried. This guy, a young man named Henrikson. It was this beautiful, beautiful young guy. So it was this kind of double whammy for me. And at that point, I was about 9 years into the work and was very invested in the outcome of these guys and pouring myself into it, and probably in many ways overextending myself in places that, holding things up that I shouldn't have been holding up. It felt a little bit like being like you're juggling other people's stuff.
Yeah, and you're taking on the responsibility of other people's lives.
And on one level, I was getting very good at it.
Yeah.
But it was unsustainable,
Yeah.
and this was like the universe saying, like, look, not only is it unsustainable, it's going to kill you, and others are going to die too. And so this double whammy of Eric dying and being murdered, and Jason telling me that he joined the gang, both of those hit me just like body blows. And it was the first time I really thought, like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. Yeah. But I also felt like I was so far down the rabbit hole that I couldn't see how to get out of it. I have to just keep going somehow. And I got invited to this men's retreat up in the Redwoods of Mendocino shortly thereafter. And the people running the men's retreat was this organization called the Mosaic Multicultural Foundation, run by this mythologist named Michael Mead. And the other facilitators had all these bios that I couldn't wrap my head around. Like one of them was this guy Malidoma Somé, who was a diviner. There was another guy who was an expert in like indigenous cosmology. All these phrases that I was like, I don't even know
what indigenous cosmology is.
I don't have any reference points for these things, but there was something about it that was like, these people know something I don't. So these were the guys that were running the retreat, and it was a fantastic place to just fall apart. And it was a group of about 100 guys in the Redwoods, and I got up there and everyone started sort of telling their stories, and there were songs being sung and stories being told, sharing in the room, and it got super deep, super fast, and I just cracked open like a water main, like just the grief pouring through me. It felt like 9 years of working with these young men and seeing all the tragic shit that I had seen in the system, in and around it, and it emptied me out completely. I must have cried for 4 or 5 hours straight. I remembered at one point my fists were balled up and they were just covered with water from my tears pouring out of my. I mean, I'd never cried like that in my life. It actually felt a little bit like you know why you're crying at first, and then suddenly it shifts, and suddenly you're crying. It felt like I tapped into some grief that was like the ocean underneath all the personal grief, and that my own story was just the way to that. And then I just couldn't stop crying. So that experience up there was a game changer. We did ritual work up there, one of which was a burial ritual where you sort of dig your own grave and lie in the earth. And
we should do that for you. That would make a great episode. Ritually bury
David digs his own grave
in the backyard,
lays down in it. Let's see how long he can lay there
Chris,
without
will you come back for that episode?
For sure.
Okay,
for sure.
Let's not get too
Nothing
sidetracked.
would make me happier than to see David
to throw the first shovel of
buried
dirt
up to his neck in the earth.
All right. So you come back from this retreat, and you're kind of renewed on some level.
Beyond renewed. The other thing that I will mention that happened on that retreat that had nothing like it had ever happened to me before, and it was after the grief part of it, was that in the middle of the night, on my last night there, I had an experience. Something woke me up at 3 a.m. I walked out into the Redwoods, which if you've ever been in the Redwoods, it's so dark because there's no
moon, no nothing.
You can't see your hand in front of your face. And I felt the presence of a bear in the woods. And there'd been some talk about bear sighting earlier, and something just called me out to the woods. And I ended up on this hillside in the darkness, and these lights came on around me, so like 3 lights, and I thought at first they were flashlights from other people on the retreat, and they sort of approached, and then they all kind of went off at the same time. And when that happened, I had this really palpable experience of a spirit of a bear coming down through the top of my head into my body, and suddenly I was a bear standing on my hind legs in the middle of a redwood forest, and it was the most intense experience. And my Chris Henrikson, the part of me that was like my ego conscious, whatever that was like it was like it got shot about 500 yards away. I could kind of hear it freaking out, and something in me like guided me to make this clicking noise that was like a kind of like tongue clicking noise, and it sort of like cut the line to that part of me. Wow. It was really. I found out later that bears make a kind of clicking noise when they're stalking their prey, which I didn't, none of this I knew at the time. But in any case, I was standing there in the woods, a bear. And I couldn't really see, and when I dropped down to all fours, I could see. I felt like, I'm connected to the earth, and I kind of knew where I was, and I heard a fire cry. I don't know what it was like. Sounded like almost like a Native American elder or someone singing at a fire. And so I just kind of moved in that direction and weaved my way through the woods and ended up rolling over on my back at the base of a redwood tree that was the exact location where we had done our earth burial ritual, the place we cleaned it all up, but I ended up right back there.
That's cool.
And I just lay there on my back as a bear in the redwoods and had the most amazing
Was it
night.
A peaceful experience?
So peaceful. It was like you're the top of the food chain. I was warm. I felt like it was probably 40, 45 degrees, and I was like in a t-shirt and sweatpants. but I just felt completely warm, held by the earth. It was incredibly peaceful. And also I felt protected, and it was like this incredible homecoming. I don't know how else to describe
This is
it.
like the kind of the stuff that I want, where I'm like, I want something like that. Like Chris gets all the experiences.
We're going to bury
Chris gets
you.
all
Just
the good
relax.
stuff.
So do you feel like the bear is kind of your spirit animal in some, what's your connection to the bear?
So my grandfather called me Christopher Bear when I was a kid. I'm not sure I would connect that to this at all.
Why not though?
But my relationship with that bear spirit has continued. Up until that point, I hadn't thought about the fact that I was called Christopher Bear. I was a fat little kid. They thought I looked like a bear cub, so they called me Christopher Bear. And then I became not a fat little kid, and I never thought about it again. But that moment and that evening in the Redwoods really changed it was a lot like the Whitman experience in that it was another signpost along the way where I was like, oh, there's so much more
going on than we can see.
And I remember this feeling of, if you had stumbled over me in the woods, I don't know whether you would have seen a human or a bear. That's how real it felt to me. Like I really, and then when the light,
you would have known from my reaction,
right, dude? What are you doing?
No, it would have been screaming.
But as the light started coming up, I was like, okay, I'm a human.
I'm me again.
I'm me again. And I remember kind of getting up, and I remember thinking in the moment, like, was everybody on this retreat out in the woods? Like, is that just what's going down here tonight? And then it became clear that no, I think I was the only one. I was a bear last night.
Wait, quick question.
Yes.
Those lights you saw before you became the bear, were they just visions ultimately, or were they electrical lights?
No, they weren't electrical lights. I thought they were. In the moment, I thought they were flashlights. And actually, as they were coming toward me, I heard a voice say, "You're not alone." And they all kind of went off at the same time.
Like spirit lights.
Yeah. Kind of orbs.
So that's such an amazing story.
It's so cool.
So I came back from that experience, it changed. I just was like, if that's possible, what else is possible? The despair that I'd felt in the work with street poets felt like that my relationship to that had changed. It had been kind of exercised from me. And I also was like, oh, there's a whole other thing going on here that I need to follow. And by the way, I've been running this mentoring organization for 9 years, and I need some new mentors of my own because I don't know what the fuck I'm doing now.
Wow. Yeah.
Like
but also, is there also a sense that, wait a second, here I am trying to make all these things happen and taking on all this responsibility for all these people, and there's a lot more going on. There are other people in charge.
No, exactly. Yeah, it's not on me.
Yeah.
I kind of come to that realization already, but there was
a key
it was
part
a
of
key
it,
element. It was like it's not about you. It's not on you.
Just like, dude, you're just a bear. Like, relax. You're just a bear.
And I do think that experience came because of everything that emptied out. It was like
made room for it.
Yeah, the grief kind of prepared the vessel in a way for that experience to happen. But I reached out to Jason in the wake of that, actually on my drive home, because I had kind of given up on Jason, not given up completely, but just like, I don't know how to help him. He's so deep in the dark stuff now. And I reached out to him, and he picked up his phone immediately, and I was like, hey man, let's get lunch tomorrow. And he's like, all right. And I'd been trying to, we had been disconnected for months at that point. So I went with Jason, took him out to lunch at El Cholo restaurant, which is one of the spots we would hit regularly near our office. And I was sitting across from him at lunch, and I was just very open, very present with him, just kind of noticing how he'd been using a lot of drugs. He'd been running the streets. He'd been up all night. He had the kind of like a lab rat that had been kind of through a lot of experimentation. And I was watching him, and I watched this like snake, this sort of dark mist-like snake move from his belly and then like up in and out of his neck and then up into his head. And without even thinking, I just was like, well, what was that? And I pointed to the spot where I'd seen it go in and out of his neck. And he looked at me and he was like, you can see that? Yeah, that's exactly what I had. Like, all my hair kind of stood up. And I was like, yeah, I can see that.
Oh my
God. Wow.
And then he said, he looked away for a second, then he's looked back at me and he was like, he wants to talk to you. And I was like, all right. let's talk. You know,
the snake.
My heart's starting to beat a little bit. But
should we order first? Because there's that, they run out of the blue corn enchiladas.
This other being, really, I mean, it was like, I watched his face kind of shift. It got kind of flushed and the eyes got a little dead. And this other being was like, you don't know what the hell you're doing. Back off. He's mine. He's always been mine. Like basically claiming Jason as his own. And I just started asking him questions. I sort of put on my Village Voice reporter. Right. I was like, how long have you been together? And he's like, since way before you came around.
So you didn't take a confrontational.
No.
Yeah, that's I was just like, so smart.
I was just like, all right, I didn't feel vulnerable myself in the moment, except.
But wait, just to be clear, when you're dealing with a serpent spirit,
demon,
you probably shouldn't be confrontational.
Yeah, I don't know.
I was respectful of that, but also I've been working with these gang guys for 9 years. It wasn't like the energy that was coming at me was unfamiliar to me.
Okay.
I just had never seen it before.
In this, personified.
I'd never seen it so clearly and like the way that it showed up.
Okay, so continue with your stories.
So I'm asking questions. I'm trying to draw it out, and it's being very asked what his name was. He's like, names can be used against you. He's not going to give me a name.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
not giving you anything.
No. So then I was like, all right, maybe I'll try this. Jesus loves you. Because I'm like, let me just see if I've watched The Exorcist or whatever. Maybe it was just a little bit like throwing a jab. Like, let's just see what happens. And he said, he's like, you think that shit will work? That's going to work on me? It's like, you don't even believe that shit yourself. And like just totally called me out. And then I was the first point during the conversation where I felt vulnerable. I was like, oh, like he's right. He's right. And it was a little bit of a, like, not having faith in my own heart and my own presence.
He found it. He found it like a weakness in you because you had sort of like kind of bullshitted for a moment.
Yes, exactly.
Because that wasn't your thing.
Yeah.
And you were doing a movie.
And I was just trying to pull something in to see what would happen. And then you get a
little scared. So what happened?
But then I sort of gathered myself. And then I had this realization that, wait a second, no, he's the one on the ropes, not me here. Because he felt like he had to show himself. He was threatened. He was threatened by my love for Jason.
Right.
I kind of reconnected to my love for Jason. Yeah. And that shifted things. As I kind of had that realization internally, he basically moved out of Jason's head and then back down into his belly. So
just the awareness that you had of, oh, wait, I love this kid.
Yes.
And I'm going to stick with that. The power of that thought alone, because you didn't even take a verbal approach with that.
I didn't say anything. It was a feeling. It was like, no, he's the one who's been smoked out into the open here, not me. I'm okay. And I can trust the love that I have for Jason. Like, that's what's going to keep me safe here. It's like kind of reconnecting to that.
So what was Jason's reaction now at this point?
When he came back, so it went down into his belly, and then Jason kind of came back looking like he wanted to throw up. And he didn't remember our conversation at all and was nauseous and he ended up going out onto the street and was like gagging into a bush outside. I went out and kind of just patting his back and just saying, like, breathe in the sun and trying to figure out, like, what do we know? What do I know to do here? Like, breathe in the light. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So then I was like, all right, what do I do with this kid? I can't just drop him back in the hood after this. There's got to be something. So having had the experiences that I'd had in the Redwoods, I was like, all right, the natural world is an ally in this situation. I'm going to take him to the ocean. Salt water is a cleansing thing.
Right.
Sort of elemental knowledge that I was like, let's get him to the ocean. So we went to Santa Monica and I drove him out there and we sat there and I started building a little shrine, basically like a little mandala with stones.
On the beach.
On the beach.
Uh-huh.
As the sun's setting and we're kind of hanging out. And he sort of asked what I was doing. I was like, we're making a shrine to honor the spirit of the ocean, and like, let's, and I'm just kind of
making it up as you go.
I'm waking it up. But in a weird kind of way, it wasn't like I wasn't making it up. I really felt like in that moment there was something working through me. Like I was just allowing myself to be guided. I'm like, all right, this might work. And it was partly based on my experience on the men's retreat, but also just knowing what I know about the ocean and about the cleansing power of the ocean. And so we sat there and we watched the sunset. And he turned to me. We were sitting in our little shrine that we had built. And he turned to me and he's like, well, we're going to go home now. Like, are we going to be here all night? What's going on? And I said, no, not until you've released what you need to release. This is what I'm going to suggest you do is you're going to go out into that water. It's dark at this point. The waves are crashing in. I mean, you're going to go out into that water. I'll walk with you. The first wave, I want you to just like let the water hit you and let it take whatever it needs to take. The second wave, I want you to intentionally blow out anything that you're carrying that you feel like you don't need to carry anymore. And then the third, just let the ocean take whatever you may not be aware of that needs to go.
That was just intuitive. Those three steps.
Yeah.
Those waves.
It was intuitive, but also based somewhat on some of the ritual work that I had
just done.
Yeah. So I walked with him into the water. At first he got a little, I could feel him get nervous. And then as he was doing that, I ended up, I still remember I was standing right next to him and he was looking out at the ocean and he started to sort of panic. I could see, he was like, oh no, I don't want to. And I called in the bear, like really consciously. It was like, no, I need the bear here now. And just to kind of keep him. And I brought that kind of energy in and sort of, I don't know how aware he was of it, but like, I kind of sniffed around his head. I was like,
you were the bear.
I made myself big. And also to kind of get that, because I could feel that thing wanting to escape.
And the bear
was like a way of kind of like
scaring it out
or keeping it in place so that Jason could do what he was meant to do. And so I walked with him down into the water. He went into the water and the first wave came in, and instead of going down, as I'd sort of told him to fully immerse yourself, make sure your head gets under it and everything, he jumped up and it hit him at the neck. And then he just turned and like sprinted out of the water. And I was like, oh shit. I sort of ran after him and he was up and he was kind of like going like, it was almost like someone had sprayed him with a shotgun blast. Right. Like, I can't believe I'm not bleeding. And he's like, I'm okay. It wasn't Jason talking. It was this other thing. Oh. I could see him and I was like, Jason, come on, you can do this. But I could tell it was like the other thing was the one calling the shots at that point. And so I, ended up kind of giving up for the night, and I ended up taking him back to the car and driving him back home, dripping wet, and dropped him at his house in the hood. And I was exhausted, man. Like the next day, it felt like I had been just run over by a truck.
Do you think, though, that there was some sort of progress was made in that?
Jason would say, if he were here, that it gave him hope. Mm. It made him realize that there was something that he could do to help shift. In the moment, for me, it felt like I lost that one. And not only that, it took a lot out of me. Right. I felt like I got kind of slimed by the whole experience, But it also made me really realize, like, look, I need some new mentors. I can't be making this shit up. I can't just rely on whatever. And that's when I started working with Malidoma Somé, who is one of the guys he's the West African. One of the first things he said to me when we talked about this was like, if you can see it, you're meant to work with it. And I needed to hear that, because there was a part of me that was like, I know I'm seeing what I'm seeing. But I don't, my ego consciousness and overeducated.
Am I just seeing shit?
There was no part of me that ever was concerned about, like,
Were you ever concerned you were going crazy? Never?
No. Oh. No.
Wow.
I felt really grounded in what I was experiencing and seeing. And it didn't feel, and I felt very present throughout the whole thing.
Yeah. All right. So that took a lot out of you. Where did it go from there?
Well, Jason fell right back into the hole that he was in. I think he ended up going to county jail shortly after that.
For what crime?
I think he was caught with a credit card that had been stolen from somebody in a strong arm robbery.
Right.
So he was implicated in.
It wasn't for bringing a bear to Santa Monica?
It was not.
Okay.
It was not.
So he went to jail.
He went in, and I went into deep, like, fine, I need mentors, I need training, I need to understand what's going on with me, and also I need to find some techniques and things that are going to help me. I knew intuitively that it was possible to separate that entity, or whatever it was, the serpent from Jason.
Yeah.
I just didn't. I also knew that I didn't have the tools to do it.
Right.
So I started, especially looking into the shamanic world for
Right.
support in that way.
Right.
And that sent me down a couple of different paths with different mentors.
Right.
Getting training basically in what I would now call spirit extraction or energy extraction work.
Wow.
So I spent a number of years studying both West African ways of addressing that and also
Native American.
I ended up going to a place called the Four Winds Society. That's a pretty well-known kind of bridge between Andean medicine and the West. There was a particular form of extraction work that this guy Alberto Villoldo had
developed.
He had learned and then developed to share with Westerners. That was a less messy way of addressing extraction work than the West African ways I was learning, which involves
sacrifices and things like that.
Exactly. So I was learning a couple of different modalities.
Yeah.
Really, with the idea, what was driving it was like, I want to help. I love Jason. I love this guy. Yeah. And there were others in our community too that were ailing in a similar way, that were in the gang life, and I wanted to be a resource for them. I wanted to be able to do more than I had been able to do to that point.
Okay, so you've gained some knowledge from studying with these various teachers and these various paths, and so now how did you then address it in your work, and particularly with Jason?
So over time, I ended up starting a healing practice basically down the hallway from Street Poets. So I was running a nonprofit organization, but then there was this room down the hallway that I had discovered that just sort of magically was there. I didn't even know there was a door there, and then all of a sudden there was this door,
and then there's a room.
What's in that door? And it was a storage room, but then we turned it into a healing room. Wow. So there was a good 6-7 years where I was working in the mornings with people in that healing room, both Street Poets related people, and then eventually others as well would come kind of word of mouth. And then I would go down the hallway and try to
write poetry,
run a nonprofit organization. Yeah. And that worked for a while because of the people I had around me. I had some staff that had been drawn to Street Poets for the sort of spiritual energy of the place. But eventually that became super challenging to be able to sort of walk in both of those spaces at the same time.
And certain people who are coming into Street Poets aren't going to be hip to the, the healing stuff down the hall, right?
Yeah, it was interesting. We built an ancestor shrine in our office at Street Poets that included everyone from deceased Street Poets that were no longer with us to James Baldwin and Maya Angelou, so it was like this, it's really this beautiful shrine. That was kind of a clue to people that when they walked into our office, like, this is kind of a different place. Like,
there's a shrine here to dead people.
Yeah, exactly. And we did our weekly Seeking Peace circle in front of that. And we began to ritualize that a little bit. Like, everyone, when they would check in, would hold rocks and place them into a bowl of water. And we'd talk about the elemental, the fire and water and earth, and how these different things, and really what they are, and what the dimensions of them are, and what the metaphoric implications of them are. So we were kind of like recognizing in some ways our own roots as poets. Right. One way I think of poets these days is that we're the kind of keepers of the indigenous roots of our culture, in the sense that we see things in metaphor the way indigenous people see things. How fire can be like seen as a gateway between the living and the dead, for example. Right. Or how fire, when it's out of control, can show up like addiction and violence in a culture, but when it's balanced, can be like the fire in the middle of the village that everyone wants to gather around and connect through.
Powerful, yeah.
So we started to think about those things and talk in that way.
And what happened with Jason?
So eventually he got out of county jail. Because of the experience we had together, I think he always knew it was like a thread there was a connection between us.
He knew that was the way out.
And I think county jail was unsettling enough for him so that he was starting to think, all right, how do I get out?
I got to figure this
So
out.
how did he get out? All right. How did you help him?
A whole journey, because it takes he spent a lot of energy getting sucked into that world. It wasn't a quick fix to get out, but there was doorways that we created along the way, and I did a lot of extraction work with him, a lot of healing energy work. So he was one of the guys in the Street Poets community that I was applying what I was learning to.
Right.
Of all the guys I worked with, he was one of the most enthusiastic. He was very drawn to spirit. He told me later that when he was growing up in this Baptist church with his mother, who was very religious, the priest were always saying that he was going to be a priest. He was going to be because they could see his gifts.
Yeah. Were there significant moments that sort of chronicled his departure from the gang, his changing his life around?
So there was the energy work. We started doing a lot of sweat lodge work, and that became a really important practice for him. And for a lot of our gang guys, actually, because there was something about the experience of going into the dark and into that engaged their psyche on the same level that the gang stuff did. It was there's an intensity to it. There's suffering involved. There's sacrifice involved. Which is very much a part of the Red Road and the Native American spiritual tradition, is like understanding that for something to be sacred, sacrifice is involved, whether it's your own suffering or your...
Right. There's something very interesting, though, about the notion of, like, there's power in, like, a gang, right? There's intensity and power, right? And it pulls you in. The same thing for a sweat lodge. There's intensity and power in that.
Yeah. I mean, if you've joined a gang, death is a part of that.
Right.
Whether or not the gang, there are some gangs where it's like you can't join the gang until you've killed somebody.
Right.
That's part of the initiation. But whether or not that's the actual initiation that someone goes through, there's death is part of that equation. So to get someone out of the gang, you need to engage them on that same level. You need to be able to talk to them like, like even just the question, what in you wants to die? If you're feeling suicidal, for example, people don't often ask suicidal people what in you wants to die. It's the most powerful question you can ask someone at that kind of a threshold.
Like, does it mean like what part of you?
Yeah. Instead of saying like, oh, you don't want to die. You don't want to die.
Right.
Think of all these things that make you want to live.
Instead you say,
oh, no, what is it in you that wants to die? I'm going to take you at your word that you want to die.
Right.
So let's look at that. What wants to die? Because when you ask someone that question, they identify with the thing that wants to die, but there's also the part of them that's looking at that doesn't want to die. Exactly. That's not in that, on that, and that's
the way out.
Yeah.
So what happens with Jason?
So sweat lodge, the energy work. Jason's superpower is he says yes to things. He's an extremist. He's volatile, and it was both his weakness and his strength. So when he was getting out of that life, if I suddenly heard that this guy was taking a group of people that had been affected by violence in the United States to India for 3 weeks, Jason was my first. I was like, Jason, you want to do this? And he was like, yeah, I'll do that. I'll go.
And so he went to India?
So he went to India. He went to India for 3 weeks.
And it was a spiritual pilgrimage of sorts?
Yeah. You got to sit with the guru and share his poetry with the guru. And then he got to go to Rishikesh and sit by the river Ganges. And it was like things were opening up for him. And also ayahuasca became an important step of his journey too.
Right.
We got plugged into some communities that were working with that medicine, and I remember at the time thinking like I got too much on my plate to go there, but I know somebody who might go there. It had been described to me as Roto-Rooter for the soul, and I was like, I know a guy who could use a little Roto-Rooter for the soul.
So you sent Jason?
So I told Jason about it, and he jumped on it.
He said yes.
He said yes. Jason was like, all you had to do was open the door a little bit, and he would just like bust through. And one of the gifts of my relationship with Jason has always been, being around someone who's that impulsive and that kind of says yes without thinking often was a real gift. In some ways, I think it helped me to
Be
step
like
through
that
some
too.
of those
Break
doorways.
through some of those,
It reminds
barriers.
Yeah.
It reminds me of at one point my daughter who was in high school was very, very ill, and I was really scared she wasn't going to make it. And I don't know if David is related to you, but I used to communicate with this spiritual entity called guidance.
Yep.
And they would always say to me, she's going to be fine. And the reason you know she's going to be fine is she wants to live. She wants to live. And it sounds very similar to Jason. He wanted to live. He said yes.
Yeah.
When you were having lunch with him and he said, you saw that, you can just hear in you telling of it, like this moment of hope, or when you're at the beach, this moment of hope that there is a way out,
Yeah.
And that element it's critical to healing.
There was an aspect of him that always wanted to live. And then there was also a part of him that was like, had to go, was an extremist, like had to go deep into the dark. There's not a lot that have plunged as deeply in and were able to get out.
Yeah.
And as I tell him, it's like, I think it will make him more able to reach people that other people, including myself, are like, I can't help that guy. And
right.
Was there ever a moment where he said that thing is gone?
One way of looking at the energetic body of a person is like an onion. There are layers. So when Jason got out of county jail, he had more than one entity in him. And they tend to stack up kind of. And in his case, it was peeling away layer after layer after layer, like getting to the core of his.
These sort of almost like layers of different demons or different negative energies that are in him, and you're sort of peeling one off to the other.
And they kind of hide behind each other. There's like, one of my teachers used to talk about it like there are the sort of dumb, nasty ones. Then there's just kind of like the nasty ones, and then there's like the smart and nasties.
Ooh, that's
those are the tough ones.
Yeah, those are the ones that are like, because they're
tricky.
They're manipulative.
So tell us a little. I think Dave and I are both looking for he's going to be over the top.
Yeah. What I would say is that in the last 3 years, particularly, he took on. There was a point at which his engine. I didn't feel like, it's in any way.
Right. You don't have to do anything.
I don't have to do anything. And he might still come to me to do some energy work, but it was like, he's like, I need a little tune-up, man, or I need this. But it was always him driving it. And now he's in a place where, he actually introduced me to ayahuasca, to working with ayahuasca eventually, because he got into that work way before I did. Right. And then when I stopped doing the street poets work, I was like, all right, this might be a time where something like that medicine would be helpful to me in terms of helping to shift and reimagine what the next stage of my journey is going to be.
Which is an episode of Spiritually Challenged that I want to get into another time. I want to hear about those stories. In fact, David recommended that you come talk to us so that we could hear about that.
Yeah.
But your life before that is so rich and so full. And the story of Jason is amazing, as you put it. There's just so much more going on than we realize.
Yeah.
But in closing, if you were to sum up this whole experience and you were just to speak from your heart about everything we talked about today.
Well, the heart is where it starts. Whatever our practice is, whether it's meditation or yoga or whatever we've found, it's about opening the heart more and more and more. And I think when we open our heart, we open our vision. We see more. It sounds simple, but it's like I'm a big believer that there's no being that is beyond love, and that when we open our hearts to the point where it's like love is really flowing through us, we can direct it in any direction, even into the deepest, darkest places. And I've had the really privilege of being in some of those deep, dark places, and encountering some of those deeper, darker energies, the stuff that we really like. There's a lot of fear in our culture around that, and understandably, but light transforms those places.
Yeah.
It's imagine being in a deep, dark basement. You light a match, it illuminates the whole basement. Just one little match,
Yeah.
And I think light is so powerful, and we're capable of bringing light into even the places that
don't have any.
That where there's no light at all. So
And what's so interesting in your story, several times comes up, is this awareness that someone like Jason, who has traveled that deeply into the darkness, when they come out of it,
their light shines way brighter.
They have so much knowledge from having gone so deeply into the darkness. And also in similar way, when you let go of that grief, you opened yourself up to allow so much more to come in.
Yeah, completely.
I loved this episode. I loved having you on the show. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for the work you've done and the contribution you've made to the planet we all share. And I'm so happy to be in some way able to share all that beautiful knowledge and powerful story with more people.
Thank you, man.
Okay.
I love the conversations you're having here.
Oh,
so
good.
I feel privileged to be a part of it.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to Spiritually Challenged on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.